Hi, everybody. I'm Adriana Hopkins with ABC 7 News, coming to you from Prince George's County for PGC MLS This Week. Former U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey discusses her memoir, Memorial Drive, Thursday at 7 p.m. She is the author of 5 collections of poetry that include Monument, which was considered for the 2018 National Book Award, and Native Guard, which won the 2007 Pulitzer Prize. Dr. Randall Horton discusses his new poetry collection, number 289128, Wednesday at 7 p.m. He is the recipient of the Gwendolyn Brooks Poetry Award and a National Endowment of the Arts Fellow in Literature. Horton is a professor of English at the University of New Haven and is the only tenured full professor in the nation who has had 7 felony convictions. This virtual event is co-presented with the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission and the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Don't think you can qualify for or afford health insurance? Well, think again. Get your questions answered at the Assessing Health Insurance Virtual Town Hall presented by the Prince George's County Health Connect and PGC MLS this Tuesday at 7 p.m. Learn more about the COVID-19 special health insurance enrollment happening right now. And this Friday at noon, youth of all ages are invited to learn how oil spills affect wildlife during the STEM at Home, No Water Off a Duck's Back virtual event. If you want to experiment during the event, you'll need some household supplies, so check out pgcmls.info for more info. Choose from more than 70 world languages to learn from at home or on the go with Mango Languages. These are award-winning language courses that make you want to start the conversation, and they're free at your library. Check out these events, resources, and a whole lot more at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. You can do so by going to www.pgcmls.info. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hiram LaRue, and as a poet and a library trustee, it's my deep pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event on behalf of the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. We are honored to co-present tonight's exciting program with the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission, also with the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, and with Loyalty Bookstores. Tonight's program is also presented in association with the Carroll County Public Library, the Howard County Library System, the Ruth Enlow Library of Garrett County, and Worcester County Library, so across Maryland. Our special guest this evening is Dr. Randall Horton, who is a distinguished poet and author. He's the recipient of the Gwendolyn Brooks Poetry Award and the National Endowment of the Arts Fellowship in Literature, among many other accolades. He also currently sits on the advisory board of PEN America's PEN Prison Writing Program and is a professor of English at the University of New Haven. Dr. Horton has conducted workshops and has lectured and toured numerous adult and juvenile detention centers across the nation to provide encouragement and hope for those entangled within the legal system. He is especially interested in eradicating the language of incarceration that tends to re-criminalize those caught up in the legal system. Dr. Horton is currently the only tenured full professor in the entire country at a university or a college with 7 felony convictions. He's a member of the experimental performance group Heroes Are Gang Leaders, which recently received the 2018 American Book Award in oral literature. The Baraka Sessions was named Best Local Jazz Album by NPR in 2019, and perhaps he'll be able to say a little bit more about the Baraka Sessions. We invite you to borrow Dr. Horton's books from your local library system, including, of course, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, or purchase the books from loyalty bookstores via the links that will be posted in the chat room. Our moderator this evening is Miss Kyla Hanington, the outreach coordinator for the county's Human Relations Commission. So with that, I wish everyone a wonderful program. Enjoy the program. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Randall, it's so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm really excited about this conversation, so appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me. Totally appreciate it. Looking forward to it, actually. So, yeah.
So I was wondering if I know that there are some people joining us who are very familiar with your work. There's some familiar names that I see watching on YouTube from Mississippi University for Women. So first of all, shout out to a lot of familiar names and YouTube faces. And but I also know some people that your work is new to. And I was wondering if you would start us off by reading a few poems or reading really whatever you like to sort of introduce people to your work.
Well, I'll read some from the new collection, which came out September 8th. With the University of Kentucky Press, and it's titled 289128. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about the poems, but just to give you a little sample from the first section. 289128, property of the state. Rhetorical, perhaps. We do not experience movement, the cell, a setting, a chronic thing. We do not experience only exist in the frame behind the cell we stand. Each step in place with the next still standing. We do not move until told. This instant, we only have moments, mementos to be lived in slow motion. A cinematic dream, I see you the good. While we evildoers rock like pomegranate, one sweet, fresh, and vibrant. Rehabilitation is love letters to a ghost. Discourse in the day room, we look at the world on TV to see our false selves. Inside a constructed frame with the toe, we enter as if we never left. 289128, property of the state, animals. The only thing less than a nigger is a prisoner. Roger Fentress, August Correctional Center. A heat wave envelops the mid-Atlantic, abnormal like the notion of prison. Outside, an unrelenting centigrade oven bakes the male housing unit. Cells are jam-packed with the guilty who played out though very innocent. 7 sounded better than 25 straight. For more than a few consecutive days, there's a spell cast over the complex. A 5-inch fan oscillates the aroma of piss from the toilet bowl and it's jungle-like. Where grown men and young boys blend, each inmate's sadness compounded. No shade, nowhere to hide, and running would get that ass shot at the razor fence, dangling in blood, so you sit, suffer, while asking, is this how the story ends? 289128, don't trust the process, property of the state. Wait and waiting and wait. Naked, stand before God, you are now quite invisible, will not materialize through iron nor the ignorant. Nothing changes, nothing. Intake, property, medical sees a piece of humanity. Each destination a moral point converging toward a sale. Hidden in the open byline, no one actually believes unless given a grand tour via handcuffed to unbreakable plastic. Behind the back pull top, no money, no phone call, no bail. Product for expenditure or process of prosecution for the good of the people. Dante and Duncan once said, the most abused of an unrighteous order, wrote the Solidaire brother. Good people do not reside here. Screaming in a dark ocean, the body is not constitutional, becomes more effective than yelling. This setup ain't right. 289-128. 289-128. Poet in residence, cell 23. Aesthetic beauty, I remember, I think. Was that you we saw in our tainted conscience, that peripheral place of forgettable moniker at and beyond the edge to say you were there? Out of which will well be a slippage, and even though it appears as if one aesthetic borderlines another, endangered of being boundaried, you as in pristinely, you were stowed away in that place that isn't a place more than vision could see. To touch, to try became taboo. Your category ungovernable and radical and illegal, like someone said. This mode of communication we string together, it doesn't equal us, and you oh so crazy, blinded by time, the same tawny fields, the flowing man-made streams we bought into constricted ideals in that place whose name is merely a phantom of dead letters. The landmarks daily changing as if to get lost to find our way back to nowhere, and understanding 1,000 standing mirrors of body memorializes, and nothing can erase what we saw, the real you, in one fleeting moment as the day before and almost the day after will never construct itself again. This moment we had to keep asking ourselves over and over, the simplicity of an act, the casual step aside glance in the first minute of a new day. There you were, knowing all we had to do was leap. 289-128, poet in New York. Remember, do not turn from the difficult thesis. Think back to the slim praying man in cell 15 with needles stuck in vein. Religion or dope can stop time. Remember 72 in a unit built for 30, that never-ending revolving door. Or the overcrowded choir singing, I am the wretched of the earth, typed on a Smith Corona at night. How cell 23 demanded rabble art. What about the couple in cell 22, lifeless, who found love doing a bed? Father and son as cellies on the top tier. No generation will be left behind. Too many bodies lingering in limbo, the worn out of illusion of truth see. Memorialized faces you will forget. Victim turned perpetrator in cell 6, sold at age 8 for a bag of meth. Nothing is black and white. 289-128, poet in New York. Still invisible too. After the Invisible Man statue on the Upper West Side for the fallen ones and those still to fall. A stone's hurl from the Henry Hudson Riverside converges into 150th Street, foundationing a bronze cutout man. His metal insides hollow, erased mid-stride in a hurried stroll, as if running from the police is a trope cyclic within time's continuum. High above ground level stereotypes, exhibit A in media res defines itself. Tonight's moon eliminates the dark, docile Hudson. Across the GW Bridge, car beam stabbed through late traffic. And onto a park bench, I, 289-128, sit while observing this troubled man more me. I'm a medic confused clone of trauma. Temporal space, history, caught in color construction. If literature reflects human existence, Ellison nailed the novel. As in, people refuse to see the who of what I am, since before post-racial. I am labeled armed, dangerous, known to pack, dark and hyphenated, the typecast memorialized in perpetual fear. Time never ticks, the clock forever strikes midnight and high noon together. Tonight, I must confess, skin color is a race that never stops running. Stop there.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I could just listen to that all night, I'm sure. And I will start. I wasn't going to start with this, but because your reading is so powerful. And so there's such wonderful cadence and musicality to it that, I wonder about, I mentioned to you before this started that there's this lyricism to your work and this musicality to your work that reminds me of the jazz poetry of T.J. Anderson III, who, for the who are listening, aren't familiar with him, he's a wonderful poet out of Virginia, and I suggest checking out his work. But I'm wondering, how much does music impact your writing?
Music has I think music definitely impacts my writing, but it's the rhythm and the cadences and the consonants and assonance of sound and all of those combination of things that really fascinates me. A lot of times I'm looking I look at poetry as almost compositional. And you speaking of T.J. Anderson, he did a wonderful study on a poet named Stephen Jonas, right? And for me, Stephen Jonas, embodies the idea of, like, if you want to call the jazz poet, one who sort of like experiments within the stanzas for the sake of the poem and kind of goes in these spaces that's very rhythmic and very enjambment centered or thought about, or in terms of assonance and consonance and all of those things that sort of make poems music. And so that's part of it. And so I'm trying to figure out how does that sort of translate onto the page and to the words, and so obviously, I'm influenced by a lot of music. I think early on it was just that, and I think I began to make the correlations between what I was thinking about and sort of like the jazz tradition, in terms of the avant-garde nature of sort of experimentation within the break, as Fred Moten would call it, or so. And I think it was a gradual thing for me. When I started doing my dissertation, when I was getting my PhD at SUNY Albany, I did my dissertation was on culture, memory, and trauma in the Black radical tradition. And one of the things I looked at was sort of like the jazz aesthetic as being radical in their radical way. And so I got to sort of really examine some of the musicians and sort of what they were doing. And so I think I really started trying to really pay attention to how does that translate into like the composition of the work, and there's sort of like, there's the work that sort of has to be presented on the page, right? Definitely. And there's that needs to be read. And so, like, how does that intersect? Like, a wise poet once told me one time, the page and stage are both made of wood, so you got to respect them both, right? So there's the mutual respect, between the page, think about the performative, and sort of like how would the reader come to my work too. So all of those things I'm thinking about, because my speaking of PG, my start, when I really started getting into to poetry and all that, it was in DC at Teism at the slam scene back in the early 2000s, and so that's when I really began to sort of think about what it meant to sort of try to be a poet. And so I kind of cut my chops on that. And at the same time I was doing that, I was being introduced to stuff on the page in a very interesting way, actually in DC. And so all of those things sort of like sort of stayed with me. So yeah, I'm always thinking about the musical component and how does that work. I don't want it to be forced, I want it to be within the context of whatever it is I'm doing. So yeah,
it's amazing, because it is one of those, when I'm reading the poems as a reader, having not heard you read them, I'm like, okay, look, I love the poems, and then hearing you read them, in my having not heard you read before, you're reading differently. I'm hearing them differently than I experienced them on the page, and they both are so powerful. And so that's an incredible. It's incredible how they both work. And I think, having heard you read now, the poems will read differently when I read them on the page. And I just think that is, it's pretty extraordinary. And but I am thinking, as you're talking, and I know we had this in your introduction, we're talking about music. Can you tell us about Heroes Are All Gang Leaders? What's that part?
Heroes Are Gang Leaders is a jazz avant-garde experimental troupe of jazz musicians and poets. We all met around the time of Amir Baraka's death well, in the time, it was the Mayor Baraka's funeral homegoing in Newark at the city auditorium, believe it or not. And it was an interesting event that day. I've never been to like a homegoing like that. It was like Savion Glover was there, Danny Glover emceed. It was, and you had all of these actors and actresses, and people from different walks of life who had been, sort of influenced and affected by Amir Baraka. So anyway, after the homegoing, we was, it was a bunch of poets and a few musicians, and we were talking about ways we could do something to tribute Amir Baraka. As you know, he was a jazz critic. He did a lot of jazz. He followed jazz musician in the jazz aesthetic. He did the blues people and sort of like, began to think about that serious study of jazz. And so he reached across, both the musicians and the writers. And just so happened, there was a writer by the name of James Brandon Lewis, musician, saxophonist. And he actually went to Howard. A young guy, and he was signed with Sony at the time, so he had some recording studio space, and we were able to go in there. And I think it's a 12-piece band, so there's a lot of people. I'm just one cog among many, but the first project was called the Baraka Sessions, and we took a lot of the Baraka texts from very, Heroes Gangley is from a short story. And so and so we took that as our name, but then we looked at all of his literary texts, from plays to short stories, to critical work, to poems, and we set some of them to music. We created stuff. And so it was a very collaborative process. And in the process of doing that, we're going somewhere with it. And when we finished the project, we realized that we liked working with each other, and we realized that it was something a lot bigger than ourselves here. And so we actually kept working, and so Baraka Session was actually our first project, which we didn't release. It was our third release. So we kept working. After the Baraka Sessions, we decided to keep working, and we produced 2 more albums, and then we brought up the Baraka Sessions after we had, so that was kind of a good move. Looking back on it, because we knew we were, we just started out, but we wanted to establish ourselves outside of the Baraka Sessions before we brought that in that way, and we wanted to make sure that we did it justice, and we didn't want to just put anything out just for the sake of. And so we tinkered with it a lot to added stuff, and while we were still doing the other stuff. And so the short of it was probably the most amazing experience in terms of beginning to see all of these things I've been thinking about conceptually, in terms of studying and thinking about jazz musicians, writing about stuff. But now I'm on stage and I'm watching them. And so, the most interesting thing about working with a lot of jazz musicians is they hate to play the same thing twice. Why we gotta do that, man? And so it taught me, though. It taught me to sort of think about where am I going with the next line, with the next thing in the poem, and am I falling too much in the cliches? So it makes you go back, you know what I mean? Because all of it is language, poetry, all sound, it's all language, communication, how they get down. And so I would highly suggest any practicing artist, sort of like dabble into other things besides that which you're sort of comfortable with. Because I can promise you, and there's no way I'm comfortable with like getting on stage. When I started that wasn't what I was. If you told my mother the day that I was in a band, she'd be like, "You can't sing." I'm like, "No." So things happen, and so you find yourself in certain situations, and you are cog among many, and it works. So that's one of the good things about being part of the creative process and the collaborative process that I found when I came home from prison and going down that road. That's one of the things that sort of drew me to this, was the community aspect, and that part of it. I think that was something that was sort of missing in my life, actually. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I want to talk about your experience in prison, which is so much a part of your work. And again, for those people who have yet to get to this is just such an amazing, I keep using the word compassionate when I talk about this collection, but it's the word that comes to mind for me. Like it's eye-opening, and I felt as I read it that my spirit was being changed in a really powerful and important way. So on a personal level, I thank you for bringing to me ideas and feelings that I wouldn't have otherwise had. And I want to talk, there's a line in your bio that I'm going to quote back if I can, because I think it's really important. You said you're active, you're passionate about eradicating the language of incarceration that tends to re-criminalize those entangled in the legal system.
Right.
And so I'm hoping that you can tell us about that, because I do think it's really important. And, I don't know enough, and I'm hoping you can, for those of us, like, what does that mean and how can we do better?
Well, I mean, the whole idea in terms of recriminalizing the so-called criminal, for me, it's almost the most hypocritical thing. Like first of all, when you inside incarceration, you go to prison, right? And then you're supposed to go and pay your debt, and then you're supposed to do all these things, and so you come out. And then the first thing, you're labeled as you're ex-prisoner, right? And you have a felony, and then you're an ex-felon, and then you're a criminal, right? So all of these things tend to follow you one way or another, whether you want them to or not. No matter how many MFAs, BAs, PhDs I get, that's going to always be there, and it's always going to be a question. And they're going to always refer to me as sort of as an ex-criminal. And so my thing is, I think that so when people go through that whole process, why do we continue to recriminalize them, in that way? Because it becomes a recriminalization, because you have this stigma, and it carries you from when you go to the job market, and you go to the housing market, when you go to these other places where you're trying to sort of like catch the spirit of Western civilization, but then there's this sort of dead weight around you, right? There's this dead weight. And as everywhere you go, it happens. I mean, even because I got every piece of education that I needed to get, but then those things, I cannot escape those. I can't outrun them. And so one of the things that we do with people, so in a general sense, we don't recriminalize people who are bad people. Even if they're not going to jail, they haven't gone to jail, they can be the worst person known to man. We know a few in all of our personal spaces, I promise you. And yet they get the pass. So it's almost like, you get the blank check, like Martin Luther King said, you get out and you get a blank check, like you're good with society. Now, no, you're not good. And then the first thing that happens is when somebody's on TV, oh, so-and-so, he's an ex-criminal, ex-convict, so we never get out of that whole stereotypical way of sort of doing that, of looking at that, and so I've been noticing that, it's very hard. I try as much as I can not to refer to those things in that way. But, and here's the flip side of it, as someone who's sort of been through that existence, and and goes in these spaces and talks about that, I get the power of the image and the power of representation as someone who's been through that system and is able to go back. When I go to juvenile detention, when I go to all these places, like, that's something they can't even believe to understand. Well, let me even back up. Sometimes my students can't even believe, like, I am who I am. So I'm teaching criminal justice maybe. Yeah. So so the idea of me is sort of like is a fantasy of someone who has 7 felony convictions, and someone who's in their classroom teaching them, and they're going to be out there in law enforcement. See what I'm saying? So I get that part of it, but it's a slippery slope. But I think that we almost have to be conscious and sort of like re-envision the language around criminal justice and how we even attack that. And I've had some movements with that, but I've been sort of feeling with for a long time. And so I actually have a piece in there, the contradictory, the counterproductive languages, and so it's based on definitions, and and it's sort of a contrapuntal and goes back and forth and all of those. So it's meant to be read in so many different ways that you can always get to the point that you're trying to get to. So yeah, so that was important for me. How do I address that? You know?
Yeah, I mean, because it just seems like, I mean, in your memoir, and I mean, you would address not being able to find work, or finding work at only the towing company would provide you the opportunity, being going back to Howard, not going back to Howard. I mean, you know, I mean, it's all things that you were denied access to.
Right. No, I mean, it was the only job I could get was at the tow truck company in Arlington. I almost forgot about that, but that was but yeah, I mean, that was it. And even going back to Howard, I was not able to go back to Howard. I was, you know, I got my degree from University of District of Columbia. I mean, it was probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, because everybody there treated me. They gave me everything I needed, and you know, to go and be successful. And I'm forever, I'm grateful for them and indebted. You know what I mean, to sort of like taking a chance on me and able to use that to get an MFA and then a PhD. But you know, and so those things happen. Even when I was when I first got to the University of New Haven, I got a job at this distinguished. I'm writing about this in the new memoir, which comes out next year. I don't think you know about that yet, but anyway.
No, but I want to hear about that in a minute. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and I talked about, I talked about it a little bit even more this time. I talked about it a little bit last time, but I really go into depth with them and Central State with the distinguished scholar in residence, and got denied that. So there's been, and even now when I apply to go into facilities, I still get denied. You know.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I do. It's no uniformity. Like even within the state of New York, I can go to some and be denied in others, just like that. No reason. Boom, you can't come. So I tend to like, so anyway, yeah. So I did answer your question. I guess I'm trying to,
Yeah. Well, I mean, going into facilities, we did actually get some questions or some thoughts from the librarian at the Prince George's County Correctional Center Law Library. And one of the things that she talked about was like this wishing that she could get your work for the residents there and the hope, the message that you have of hope. And one of the, she actually had some questions, and I'm hoping to kind of elevate some of her things. One of them was she was really curious about how you came to find poetry, like, and when you're inside, because it was when you were in Roxbury, was that?
Right. But just let me back up. No. So what's her name?
I'm gonna. Sorry.
I'm trying to be. Trying to be personable, but
yeah, Nick. We need a Nick to pop up.
Yeah, but I was gonna say, like, you can get my book, and it can be on the inside. Like, I don't know. So I'm part of the Million Book Project, and so PG County's own Dwayne Betts. Reginald Dwayne Betts is sort of running that program. And I don't know if you're familiar with it yet. It's just sort of getting off the ground, but it's a program to put a million books in prisons, detention centers all across the country. And one of my books is going to be one of many books used. But we were able to do a couple of pilot programs in Boston, with the organization called Writers Without Margin, and they do a writing program on the inside, and so we were able to send it. So basically, tell her to contact me if that's something that she wants to. We probably can make it happen, because we've actually we've been zooming in. He's been doing some, in terms of my book, we've been able to zoom into some facilities and sort of once they get the book and talk about the book and the process and all that. So have her contact me.
Okay, it sounds like we're gonna make that happen.
Yeah. So I didn't want to get that's why I said that. And so what was the other? So the idea of poetry and how did I begin that process? Well, it's an interesting, I guess, journey, because I didn't grow up with poetry, and I didn't grow up, thinking about, writing and, like a journal and all of that stuff. I did grow up reading, both my parents were teachers. And so my mom would have me read in the summer all the time, man, all the time. So reading, was cool, but writing, I grew up on in Alabama, Southern, and Friday night football, SEC, all that stuff, man. That's what it was. So nobody was trying to be a poet at all. I didn't know what that, like no one in my spirit was even a writer. Like I didn't know what that meant. And so anyway, so I had this whole life, and I ended up incarcerated in Montgomery County, Maryland, Seven Locks Detention Center, and I go to a program called Jail Addiction Services, called JAZZ acronym. And one of the things was they was getting, you could probably get some time off your sentence. And so I was able to get in that program when I was incarcerated for the second time. I had just done like 16 months in Fairfax. And so I was trying to get some time off my sentence. I was not thinking about trying to rehabilitate my life or anything like that. I was just trying to get to the next thing so I could go back and do what I was doing. But, funny thing happened. I went to the program. I was accepted. So I went and went through going through the motions a little bit. Well, there was a component where we had to take a pad, and we, the social worker name was Pat Parker. So it was two people. It was instrumental. Pat Parker, who's Department of Health and Human Resources, Health and Human Services, in Montgomery County. Patricia Parker, she ran that program. She's a social worker there, and counselor. And Bonnie Boswell, who runs the whole. She was the one. She's the one woman in Montgomery County that's sort of responsible for getting so many guys sentenced commuted, through motion for reconsideration and places. Like, no, seriously. So she took an interest in me when I was in her program. So I started writing. I started to write these little essays, and I would read them to the guys the next morning in the circle. And so somewhere along the way, I started taking it serious because I realized at night when I was working, trying to answer these questions in my cell, I was working out the problems in my life. You know what I mean? So that's how I started the whole writing thing. And so when I left to go upstate, Pat Parker called me into her office and she said, "Promise me one thing." And I was like, "That you won't stop writing." And I was like, "No one told me." Like, "What do you mean?" Like, and so I'm like, and so I'm like, it's okay. But it was like more like somebody thought that I had something. I thought when I was writing, I was like, "I like the way this is." And the guys who read it, and we talked about things, they seemed to understand that, but it was really more about me. But I think she saw something, and she was like, you're talented, right? And I'm like, "No, I don't know anything." Like, "What are you talking about?" But then she made me make this promise that I won't stop writing. So I said, okay. So from that day on, I started working on a novel. Like, I don't know what that meant. Like, I was working on a novel. So I went upstate with this novel that I'm thinking about writing, and then somewhere along the way, the protagonist is a poet. Okay, she's a little girl from Northwest Washington, D.C., formerly of Clifton Terrace projects. She's about 12 years old. Her name was Jasmine. And I had been through that whole scene, and but somewhere along the way, this youth and this little girl sort of equated, and then being a poet, like the hope and the future, like all of that. But then she was a poet, and so I didn't know what a poem was. So I'm trying to write. So in the story, she's writing these sappy poems, right, through my voice. I don't realize that it's persona at the time, so I'm trying to personify her and write, but they're just terrible poems. So here's what. So then I meet Ethelbert. So Ethelbert Miller, DC's own. Well, I mean, so I'm in the day room one day, and there's a Washington Post, and on the front page there's an article of Ethelbert Miller in his new book, Fathering Words, at the time, and it talks about how he was at Howard and he was a poet and was influenced by the Black arts poets. So it was the whole thing, and I'm like, I never knew this guy when I was at Howard. That wasn't my thing. So, but something told me to write him because it was I didn't know anything. I know at this time I was thinking about what did it mean to be a writer, and then what did it mean to be a poet. So I wrote him, and he wrote me back. You know what I mean? So that started a long conversation, because just to get the letter and just to offer just a little bit of stuff. Because I mean, And so, you know, he has I sent him all the poems I sent him were probably terrible. Right? Well, they ain't no problem, they were terrible. But he held on to them. I think the point where there's a little folder in George Mason in his archives with Randall Horton. But all of those. So if you want to go look for flying from, you probably could. I don't want to see him ever again in life. So anyway, that's how I began to think about poems. And he would just tell me stuff at that time. I'm still trying to. I hadn't necessarily really gotten a poetry book or anything like that. And so this was toward my end of, well, I was getting ready to go back to Montgomery County for my reconsideration, my motion for reconsideration. You did my time, and then Money Boswell told me that if I went and did, what I was supposed to do, they would call me back after 5 years and see if I would, commute my sentence or whatever. So I go back to Montgomery County. Right, so I'm writing now. I'm thinking, I think I'm a writer. I don't know, but I'm trying to write. And I'm still writing the short story, and I'm writing these poems. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm still trying to figure it out, but I don't know any better. All I know is what Ethelbert is telling me, and sort of look for it. I'm trying to figure it all out. So I go back to Montgomery County, and I'm back in the same. The unit, jail addiction services. They put me right back in there. And so a social worker brought a tape in one Friday, never forget. And it was a Def Poetry Jam tape, right? And I had never seen it. I didn't know performance poetry. I didn't know none of that was. Like, I had no clue. So he put it on, and so then there's this little African American woman, probably about 5 foot nothing, 5'2". She got a little braids in her hair, and then she comes up, and the first thing she says is, "They call me skinhead. I got my own beauty. It is nice scrawl and so jagged letters. It isn't the way my eyes snap away from the obvious." Patricia Smith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, skinhead. I was blown away that if that's something that poetry could do. I didn't even know what I was feeling, but I was feeling something. All I know is when the tape was over and everything was over and we was locked in about 10 o'clock that night, I was trying to figure out, how did she do that? Mm-hmm. Like the most magical thing for me ever, to command that through language. It just did something to me, and I was like, oh my God. And I could, I was like, how does that work? And so I took that all the way with me till I went, I got my son's community sent me to North Carolina, Durham. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to North Carolina. And then when I got down there, so I'm trying to figure out what performance poetry is, all of this. And so Ethelbert hooks me up with I forget his name now. Oh, another poet down there. Can't think of his name now. Leonard Moore. And so I began to get a few more books, and then sort of reading a little bit, still writing, trying to figure it all out. And then the program I'm in is a 2-year program. And so the first year you have to, you can't go anywhere. You just kind of on the compound. And you're kind of halfway in, halfway out. You escorted, with mentors and all that. So after about 6 months, because I had the hardest job at this place where they sent me in Durham, North Carolina, it's called Terrace, Triangle Residential Options for Substance Abuse. And it's more work-centered, right? So I was the dispatcher for the whole compound of 400 people. And everybody's court-ordered trying to, work it out, right? And so they go on all these jobs, they're all doing it. So I had one of the most difficult jobs in the whole place. And so as part of that, the guy who ran the whole program, Kevin McDonald, never forget none of these guys' name, he allowed me to go to the open mic. He got wind that I was a poet, I was writing poetry. Because I was anybody that was listening, I was like, hey, you want to hear a poem? Or late at night when I was in the dorms and I would sit up, I would have, we would have we'd be talking, and once people understood that that's what I was doing, they were like, hey man, read a poem. Yo, what's that poem? And so it sort of got out a little bit. So he called me in one day and said, I heard you writing poems, huh? Because I wasn't really supposed to be doing that, And so he let me go to open mics in the city of Hillsborough in North Carolina. And that's kind of, and so I went there and I started, getting up on the mic, and, from there, man, I just sort of fell in love with the idea. And some of those writers I actually met that was coming through those open mics years later. I met them in other spaces in DC, Chicago, whatever. And so that's what started it. All of that transition. And so by the time I got back to DC, I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. And so that's why I went to T-ism and started slamming. I got into Tony Medina's workshop at Howard University. Even though I didn't go, I went to Tony's workshop. So that's where I really sort of got the grounding right there in that workshop. Even though I wasn't in school, I was still bum. So, but that was like a lot of people in DC at the time. We would bum rush Howard just to workshop, just to. So it wasn't about. He didn't care like who was playing or whatever. Like we was just we would be in the class, and every 2 days a week we'd be workshopping and talking poetry, right? And so that's where I really got my grounding. And then I went to Fierce Flower, the second one, and I was hooked. I was all in. I think I met, all of the, a lot of the legendary poets like, Lucille Clifton, Sonia Sanchez, Maria Baraka, his wife, Amina. I hadn't met Elphaba. Elphaba was there. Everybody who I had probably read up until that time was there. And it further sort of cemented the idea of community, because they were all accepting of me. I'm sort of this guy who's coming out of prison. So I'm really self-conscious a lot too about, am I supposed to be in these spaces? And I think, early on, I was told that I could be in these places. And I think that did a lot, for me, as I was trying to go forward.
So one of the questions also from Audrey Lau was finding access for writing, like materials to write with. Were you able to, when you were on the inside, were you able to get material like to do writing? Like,
yeah, it's an industrial complex. So if you have the money, you can get those things. I think for me, my parents at the time, my family, my sister, were very much in my life. And I think my mother started sending me books early on when she found out that I was getting back into reading. So she sent me a lot of books. I read every John Grisham book there was up until and so my reading was so, all over the place, but I read all John Grisham books. And I began to read, books about incarceration and all that. In terms of writing stuff, you got pads and clear pens. That's it. I had a typewriter too. So that's the thing. So I was able to get a typewriter. So I had a routine. So every morning I would write. I would wake up and I would free write. I didn't know what that's what they called it at the time, but that's what I was doing, free writing. Because I didn't know what a workshop was. Like that didn't even compute at the time. But I was sort of my self-practice with to get up and sort of free write and work on my story. And then in the afternoon, when I dropped back in, I would type it up. And then in the afternoon when we locked in, I would read it, and then I do edits or for edits later on, and then we type it up. So it was just a practice of looking at something, and I didn't realize that I was like the editing process back then. I was really thinking about how to edit. Right. You know what I mean? And so it was a process. So I was able to get a typewriter. And that was in just books, but and I think more so than anything, I just needed to be, like it was hard finding directional, like whether, I think Elphaba was probably, God can time to give me some kind of rudder to where to go, like, where or some direction in terms of where, how to sort of navigate. Because I get this question a lot in terms of how do you make a writing life, when you come out of incarceration, like I can't, there's no one way you sort of draw that up in the dirt. It just doesn't happen that way. If I had to tell you all of the jobs that, I came back to DC working out in Arlington, I didn't know a book was possible, but I thought it could be possible. But I know I had real life situation things. And so I tried to keep the artistic practice close to me, even though I was doing other kind of stuff, working the job and doing other things I needed to do to take care of myself.
It really sounds like, as I'm listening and as a writer myself and and sometimes more effectively and less effectively a writer myself, what resonates for me is also the community of writers, like that having somebody or people that you are inspired by, looking up to, that you read their work and it makes you, or hear their work and it makes you want to do more of your own work. That just seems like such a transformational piece.
Yeah. I mean, I think every actually, I'm thinking about it because I'm actually writing. I'm trying to write a piece about this because I was asked about this in some kind of way, and I think for me, every step along the way, there was a sort of community, this sort of even on the inside, beginning with Montgomery County and that little small group of guys with Pat Parker running the program. Like that was sort of almost a workshop in a way, but it was a workshop of language, but also of the human experience in terms of us trying to work out whatever it was that led us down these roads in terms of incarceration or whatever. And I think when I got to Roxbury in Hagerstown, I found a group of guys who read a lot, and they used to read my work and they would critique me all the time.
So you had a workshop there.
I mean, I don't know what a workshop is, but looking, I've been thinking back on it, like, it would be certain guys, like, I just remember, I don't know their real name, Black and Milkman. I mean, they used to come by, like, every night, they would roll an ice cart around after lock-in, and they would come to my cell, like, so, what's wrong with your protagonist? Or, do you really think that's real? Or like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. I think you need to look at that. Like, and then they started talking. So it was that kind of thing. But it was interesting. I was just happy to have someone read my stuff. And I think, a lot of that happened too, because I became, I became the official get the girlfriend back letter writer. And so I would write.
It's an important job.
It's an important job, man. So I would have people come down to my cell, like almost like an office, and like, what are you? So it was interesting. So yeah, and so, but looking back, those guys became, and then even going to North Carolina, some of those guys, and women, those people that at the program I went to, they're still we're still close to this very day, and they followed me in what the things I've tried to do since we've been in North Carolina, the program. And so that's the things that sort of that keeps me grounded too, in a certain kind of way, because poetry is poetry, language is language, creative. What we do in that realm it's good, but it's always good to have your feet grounded in the real of like the human existence. And like, I think a lot of time, because I know a lot of their stories and I know a lot of what they went through in life to even make it to the other side, like on this happy space. So sometimes we see people and be like, we don't know what the hell they went through, man. And so I think all of us that came out of that experience and that made it in the world in some kind of way, whatever it was, I think we will always be forever, tied to that place that sort of gave us a chance to sort of, do something. So, it was the hardest place I've been in my life, though. I hated every minute of it, but I did. I mean, but that's what it's designed for. I mean, I loved a lot of it, but looking back, everything was good. But when I say that, I say it in a way that it's not designed to be like a resort. It's not designed to be a place where you can sit back and you can watch. No, that's not what it was. It was a shock treatment in your face, and everything you had to be held accountable for, and if you didn't, you would have the consequences. And from small consequences to taking time off the time you got to be there. So I've been there with people who had 2 years and they stayed like 5.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't trying to stay the whole 2. So they didn't have to worry about me with that. I'm just saying it was, it got easier, but And that was part of the whole thing. It was like to sort of like get you, because see, sometimes some people are not necessarily miscarriages of justice, or they was sort of like, it was a way of sort of existing. And so I think when time, and this is what I sort of talk about a lot of times in terms of, you know, prison advocacy and those who sort of like talking about abolition and all of these things around incarceration. I think at the very core of it, you got to ask, how do you come at your social justice? At what point are you willing not to forgive someone? And what does that mean? Like, you're against this, but then you don't want to forgive nobody. I mean, I don't know how that works out. So it's tough, man. It's tough. But I think these are sort of some of the questions we have to ask ourselves. And, you know, and of course, me as the poet, I got to ask the question.
Well, and as I said, for me, reading your work has just brought me to places that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to access. And so for that, as a reader, it's just been incredible. And in the work we do with the Human Relations Commission, looking at equity and looking at, you know, that we talked about the ban the box and providing opportunity, or making sure that people are not discriminated against based on
yes.
And you know, so we do have a question. So we are almost running out of time, but first of all, if any questions, please let us know. But we do have a question from a very faithful library event and HRC event viewer, Ms. Vivian, who's wondering if you do you enjoy what you're doing?
I do. It's funny you say that. I was just talking to my sister, because first of all, both of my like I said, both of my parents were school teachers. I grew up with educators. My uncle was a principal that I used to go to school with him from the kindergarten through the third grade. And I went to school with my mother from the third to the sixth. And then I went to high school with my dad from the ninth to the 12th. So one of the things me and my sister swore that we were never going to be teachers, first of all. Like, we're never going to, I'm teaching, and so I'm a traitor already. But, you know, in terms of teaching, in terms of writing, I do, because I finally found something that I was, you know, that I was passionate about, and I found something that I was able to center my life around. And so all of the things that appear to be work aren't necessarily work. They're just what I have to do in terms of to fulfill or to get at my creative process. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's going into a place like Tucson, Arizona, into a juvenile detention center, and when the little kid, you know, hear your bio and see some clip on you, like, oh, we got an OG in the house, right? But then I have to flip that, and I have to get at him in terms of, like, you know, what it is that he's really here for. But first, I got to give him. I got to give him what he knows to be true on me. Because they're not going to connect with you unless, you know what I mean? I'm just telling you, a lot of times you got to do that. You got to go there. And then once you go there, it's like, oh, he's not playing. He knows exactly what he's talking about. Not playing no games with this. And then we can have another conversation. And then that's, you know, so I understand that power. And I understand, you know, being able to be in those places and have that impact on a little kid, you know, who's like thinking the whole world is against them. But I'm like, look at me, man. I don't, you know, we can, you know, there's always something, but you can always rise above whatever it is, you know, and I have to use that. So yeah, I like it. I like being, because, you know, because all of the bad energy that I put into this sort of world, in terms of the things that I did, I think that's the least that I have to do. You know, you know, and so, and it's something that I want to do. I think I'm able, you know, I'm able to sort of, you know, sort of center my life all around sort of the creative and sort of the issues that I'm sort of interested in. And I think I don't come to these without poetry. I just don't. I'm very aware of that. And so I couldn't have, out of all the jobs and all of the things I thought I wanted to do when I was growing up, this wasn't it. This was the thing that I needed to do. I promise. So I don't know. I mean, yeah. And so I think, you know, sometimes you just don't know, but you just got to keep on adding and believing. And I can remember quite clearly, like, the moment when I realized that I'm way out here thinking about what I'm going to do. Like I'm going to the MFA program. I don't have any money, right? So I got to make a loan, and just thank God I was able to, you know, I made a loan for my mom, right? And I hadn't done anything like that, but I know that I could get this one chance to leave DC and try to do something. And so she was like, "Well, what you gonna do with MFA?" Bless her heart, she was to death. And so, but years later, when I won the NEA, I said, "Hey, Ma, I got." So she's like, "Okay, I think you might be all right now."
That's a pretty good thing to do with MFA.
Yeah. But it was, you know, I mean, not, I say that I don't say that, I don't take that lightly, because one of the things when one comes out from the inside, like if you don't have the support, like I'm very aware of like the support that I was able to have that some people aren't able to get. And that becomes sort of like that way to sort of slide back down into that whole recidivism role. I mean, I'm not the norm, you know, but people do. I'm just saying, like, but a lot of people don't. And so I'm very aware of that as well.
Yeah, and I see, I mean, we're so little tiny bit over time, but we have a second question, I think, following up on if you enjoy what you're doing. And I'll just say in full disclosure, this question is from my dad, who is a teacher. And and he's wondering just about how you enjoy teaching. Do you enjoy?
Yeah, I do. I mean, another part of it is I enjoy teaching because my dad taught for like 30 years, and my mom too. My dad taught high school. I used to go around with him all the time when he's retiring. And he was like, "Man, your dad, it was so and so and so and so." And I can't live up to none of that, man, But I mean, and it's funny, we have these conversations now, and I get all of that. And so it's like the most interesting thing now to sort of talk to my dad who's retired teaching, and then me talk about my teaching now. And so for us to have those conversations, and for him to have known from where I've come, you know what I'm saying? And for him to have gotten up before a judge, to sort of like beg for my mercy, to sort of make sure I was able to get out of prison. I mean, and so that's the joy right there. But then also the part of being able to sort of like meet these young people where they are, and sort of like come at them through another lens. I think that's the best way to say it. I'm always aware that I'm a little different in the classroom, just a little, in terms of how, how I operate. But I always have the best interest, and I'm always trying to get them to be better citizens, world citizens, and human beings. Like, and that's from like I say, man, and like some of the kids that I've mentored are policewomen. And that's a beautiful thing. And they, and now I'm sort of getting to that point now where, people reach out and say, "Hey, Dr. Horton, I remember I had your class 10 years ago, and now I'm a lawyer out here, and I'm doing this." And I'm like, wow, I did that. So every time I think back to the prosecutor in Montgomery County who swore Mr. Horton wasn't going to be, I'm not going to say, he swore I was never going to amount to anything. He said, "Your Honor, Mr. Horton's had 38 years to get his life, 37, whatever it was. He's failed at every count. We see no reason to give him a modification of sentence or anything. He should go back and do his time." Exactly what he said. So every day I go to class, I hope I have this kid in my class.
Yeah. No, this has been absolutely amazing, and unfortunately, I wish it was not so, but we do have to wrap it up. So I want to thank everyone. So first of all, you, Dr. Horton, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening. I definitely will be back when we'll have to talk later, because I'd love to have you back for your memoir.
Right.
We got some stuff to talk about. Yeah, we're gonna keep it going. I also want to thank the partners who brought this event tonight. So Loyalty Books, which is an independent bookstore in DC and Silver Spring, Maryland, the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, and as always, Prince George's County Memorial Library System for their amazing support and partnership. Thank you so much. You can take out Dr. Horton's books, and I strongly urge you to do so. You can get them from the library, our library near you, or you can purchase them from your favorite independent bookstore. We do have a couple other really wonderful events coming up. You can learn all about our upcoming events and the library's events at pgcmls.info/events. But I'll tell you about a couple. We have former U.S. Poet Laureate Tasha Trethewey with us tomorrow evening. We're very excited about that. That's at 7 o'clock tomorrow. And then on December 2nd, we will talk to Hope Michelle Ayers about her book, Gabriel's Balloon. On December 8th, we're talking to William G. Thomas III about his new book, A Question of Freedom, which is about families in Prince George's County, Maryland, who challenged slavery through legal action. And so we hope that you'll be able to join us for all of those events. And I just, again, really want to thank everybody for their time being here, questions, and Dr. Horton. It has been absolutely amazing. I can talk to you all day. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.